Welcome everyone to Already Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 4, Episode 21. It's called The Drumhead. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. Some of our favourite episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation tend to be when Picard feels that the fundamentals, the ideals of the Federation are being messed with or are at jeopardy, and he will often end up make a speech
usually quite good
to get this point across to everyone, to explain to everyone that they can't let their morals flounder. And this is one of those episodes. This is an episode with a trial. It's an episode with some ethical things that are brought into question, and dare I say actually raises some interesting beats that I think are actually what are overly, and this almost feels too generous to say this, because I don't think this is necessarily true in a strict sense, but I do think in a weird way, you can say that the modern Trek shows and modern Trek things almost exploit with the door that this episode kind of opens, even though I think this episode offers something in a way that fits with what Star Trek is, with what Next Generation is, with who Picard is. And this episode made me kind of hate the Picard show more than I already did.
Oh, really?
Because so this episode is about a witch hunt, essentially. There's a conspiracy right at the start of the episode. They've already, before it started, we hear the opening monologue, the captain's log. They've caught a Klingon who was on board as an exchange science program. They caught him sneaking out information and sending it to the Romulans, and they've basically already kind of solved the crime. There's a little hearing we see at the start, a little bit of questioning, but it's already pretty much a done deal. He tries to kind of lure in Worf by bringing up, hey, you're not respected on, what's the Klingon homeworld called again? I've forgotten. Anyway, but he's like, you're not respected, maybe I can talk to some people in high places and maybe restore the honor of your family name. And Worf, does not accept that. He gets very upset with him and makes it very clear that he will make sure he's, punished for whatever he's done wrong, and however he's sent messages to the Romulans, he will find out, he will do his job, blah blah blah. Right, all good stuff. But there was also an explosion.
Just a couple of days later to do, and the plans for this place were transmitted along with the other stuff that he stole just a few days before. Yes, in the engineering section of the ship, and so it becomes a concern that maybe he has an accomplice on board, and there's someone else to find. They bring in this Admiral Sati. She's out of retirement, so they bring her on because she's good at questioning people. She's good at weeding out traitors and conspiracies and whatever. I don't know, but they bring her on board, and at first she's hesitant to work with Picard, but she's like, you know what, I think we're going to get along. I've often been hesitant with partnerships because I find that it's not really that equal, which is funny because ultimately everything she says that she worries about Picard being early on is what she actually is to Picard as the episode actually goes on. Yeah. But it becomes this witch hunt when and she's got a betazoid with her, right, who is reading the people that they're questioning, and they question this young officer in the medical department, and someone who gave the Klingon, the traitor, some shots. So there's a loose connection that they interacted at least once or twice, and they question him, and he's a bit nervous. And notably, the one characteristic he has is that obviously it changes a little bit later, but he is like his grandfather. So he's like 1/4 or something like that Vulcan. And once he said it, I was like, oh yeah, he's got slightly pointy ears. They're not full Vulcan, but there's a slight... you can just see it enough that once you're looking for it, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. There's a little bit there.
Oh, nice touch, yeah. So his grandfather was Vulcan, and as soon as he leaves, though, Sati's like, oh no, or the Betazoid, I should say, he's lying, right? He's hiding something. He's hiding something big, and Picard quite quickly says, well, he's nervous. Obviously, he's clearly uneasy about all this. That doesn't necessarily mean he's guilty. And of course, eventually they do find that he did lie about something. Right back at the start of his career, he lied about who his grandfather was. His grandfather was actually Romulan, and that becomes like, okay, well, if we can't trust your entry paperwork, then how do we trust anything else? You can say that kind of line of thinking. But it becomes this witch hunt for this character who they want to make an example of. They've got him they eventually bring in a crowd, which Picard doesn't know is coming, because all the hearings and questions up until this point have all been in an empty room, just with the questioners and the person. And then he comes in and it's like a whole crowd. It becomes this whole charade. And Picard's becoming more uneasy as the episode goes on about the line of thinking this is going. And we'll talk about Worf kind of separately in his own. I think that's a topic on his own as Worf almost in this episode. Sure. Even though it's directly related to everything going on. But it's this idea that Satya clearly is determined to find someone to punish, even though seemingly there's no one else to actually find. Because quite quickly in the episode, Geordi and Data have done some analysis and they've done some testing, and it's like, oh yeah, that explosion, that thing that happened, that did hurt a couple of people but didn't kill anyone. We've done the analysis, and honestly, this almost looks... almost surely is an accident. It's not an intentional thing.
It's just pure coincidence that it happened right after this, and and coincidences happen, right?
Yeah, and Saya doesn't believe it. Her Betazoid consultant or interrogator doesn't believe it either, and it becomes this thing where they're gunning and trying to make sure. And at first, they kind of play along with Picard when Picard says, "Well, that solves it, right? There's nothing to find. There's no reason to go looking for anyone else. Not really. Not in an extreme way, anyway." And they say, "Well, we're going to keep investigating just to prove his innocence. Just because, he's innocent, so let's prove it. Let's not, rule him out, and then move on.
Close the case, yeah."
But then he shows up to the next line of questioning, and it turns into a hearing. Because as he even puts it in his speech later, it might not have technically been a hearing, but it was a hearing. Like, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what it became.
Yeah, I think what he uses is trial. That's more damning than hearing.
Yeah. So it becomes this very ethical thing where Picard sees this as becoming a witch hunt, and he compares it to the Drumhead of military trials, in olden days. And I think it's a speech that he gives at the end to Worf, right at the last scene of the episode, that kind of brought it all home for me. Really, it was already great, I thought, the episode.
Yeah.
Before that point, but that speech really told me kind of how important this was in the context of what Star Trek is.
I think there are 3 truly great Picard moments in this.
Yeah, there's a good number of them. And it essentially boils down to him saying, no, you're presuming someone's guilt and you're going out of your way to hunt someone. Maybe it's to make you feel this better, that everyone will feel safer because they found a culprit. Oh, we weaned them out and we got the culprit, so therefore we can all feel safer. Because we did this. We did something about it, even though they basically made up the problem in the first place at a certain point. So there's that idea. There's this idea of Picard sticking up for someone who does. He made a mistake, and he ultimately admits to that when they confront him in the questioning, that he lied on his admissions, and Picard speaks to him privately later, and that tries to find out, okay, what was your life like? Who were your parents? How did you get into Starfleet? What did you want to be? Yada. And it just gets to know him a little bit, and it's clear that he's just a scared young kid who's now terrified that his entire career's done because he made one mistake, which ultimately isn't that innocent. And I think you could even read into the idea that he lied about that because he knew it might have an influence on how people look at him if he has Romulan blood in him.
Yeah. And do you know what? I almost there was a point in the episode around here where I almost wanted him to be guilty in some ways, in that that's not the point here. The point is, Picard going through the actual systems and not just doing this on hunches and because we can. And it never gets to that. It's just, it seems like his career is still ruined, though, at the end. Like, they don't fix this for him. That's out there now, and that's on record, and that's kind of ruined him.
Well, we don't know. It's ambiguous, honestly.
I mean, there was a little bit of dialogue at the end that made it feel to me like that was it. But I could be wrong.
It felt more ambiguous to me if he actually will be completely, yeah, sure, there'll be some kind of punishment for maybe the lies that he told, but it's kind of ambiguous as to, is he going to be ruined now in the Starfleet? Will he never be able to progress? I think it intentionally leaves it in a place where you don't know what the outcome of this is, especially given how everything ends with Sati. So the big scenes of the episode, right? Obviously, there's the moments where Picard's kind of starting to feel uncomfortable, and he's realizing what this is turning into, and he tries to tell this to Worf, and we'll kind of go back to Worf because I think Worf again deserves his own kind of through line conversation, but he doesn't want to go be a part of this. He tries to tell Sati, look, this is going to stop. I'm going to talk to Starfleet, and she's like, I've already spoke to Starfleet, and I will find whoever's involved. I will interview everyone in this ship, and I'll find every single conspirator. And it's those words like conspirator. Like, it really feels like a witch hunt at this point, where she's looking for people to, crucify.
Yeah, this really feels like their take on why McCarthyism was terrible. Essentially, right? That's what this episode is.
And then he's summoned. He's summoned for hearing, but not as one of the investigators. He's summoned to be questioned the next day.
Yeah.
And he comes in, and he sits there, and this scene is wonderful for a number of reasons. It's wonderful, obviously, because of the speeches he makes. He wants to make a statement, and I did kind of love this moment where he's like, I want to make a statement before questions begin, and she's like, no, you can make a statement. And then he's like, no, and he whips out, Starfleet like code.
all the regulations. Yeah.
He's like, hey, regulation number, blah 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 blah. Like, I get to speak first, and he tries to implore her to like shut up. And so she's brought in this other higher ranking admiral who's there to like supervise all this now. I mean, he never says a word. He never utters a word of dialogue, so you never really know what he's thinking until maybe at the very end when he walks out, and it's very clear because everyone's thinking the same thing. But early on, Picard makes this speech, and you don't really know, is he buying into, is he trusting Picard on what he's saying here, or is he thinking, no, let this go through, she wants to investigate you. We don't know what he's thinking. And I think that's an important part of the episode, is that Starfleet as a body is kind of almost characterless in this episode into what they think of what's going on here.
Yeah, there's a lot of Starfleet regulation and stuff in this, like when they question the other guy, the first time it's like, I think it's the second time when they pull him back in and ask him about the Romulan grandfather, and he basically pleads the fifth, but they have a slightly different number for it, essentially.
Yeah, well, he pleads that because Riker steps in, because Riker is offered to him as counsel, because it's starting to feel like it's more of a hearing and a trial than it is anything else.
I mean, even in the very first instance, that when they first bring him in, they're like, this is informal, no accusations, but if you think you want legal counsel, that will be provided to you. But
the question here is so good, and there's a couple of things that happen in this scene that are really great. One of them is with Worf, which we'll get back to. But the Picard stuff is really good, because she starts bringing up things from the show that we've seen that she's going to start using to call into question, like if Picard is a traitor, if Picard can be trusted. She brings up the ending of season 1 with escorting the Romulan, which is what led to Romulans are back. I think that was the end of season 1. If it wasn't, it was season 2. But it was, I remember the episode, and she brings up a couple of other incidents. She says, you've broken the Prime Directive technically 9 times since you have taken command of this ship, and he's like, yes, and all that was reported. All that was, on the up and up with Starfleet. That was all well documented. She's like, yes, we're looking into it. And then she just drops, would you say you've fully recovered from your experience with the Borg? And there's just this look, where Picard doesn't say it, and it's actually one of the classic gifs of him face palming, which I actually almost felt like, I wish that wasn't a gif, because I almost laughed a little bit when he face palmed, and it's like, it's a really good scene, it's a really good moment, but the internet's ruined it, because now all I can think of, it's a face palm moment, Picard's face palming, everyone cheer. But it just kind of, and she kind of like finishes her thought, where she's saying like, can you be trusted? You were complicit in some way with ending 11,000 Federation lives, and blah 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 blah, and he doesn't get angry, he doesn't get upset, Picard, and he ultimately just does the thing, because we learned earlier on in the episode that he studied the works of her father. Her father was this really respected judge, I think it was, or something to that.
Something, yeah. But and his works are pretty standard reading in the Academy, by the sounds of it. Like, everyone who's there will be at least familiar with this stuff.
Yeah. Certainly, a certain generation onwards, like that, he was the guy to study from. Yeah. And Picard uses her father's own words and says, I can't remember the exact phrasing of it, but it was to the effect of, the first time that one of our freedoms is taken, the first time that one person has their freedom taken, we should all be scared of it. That's the point where it all starts to crumble. And she gets so mad, and it's essentially, it's something that we've seen in movies, the idea that you, in the courtroom, and it's not always the person doing the questions, admittedly, that has to get to this point, but you essentially slip someone up by making them reveal who they really are. And in this scene, he starts yelling, how dare you, I will find whoever's responsible, because there are people responsible. And it becomes clear that she is demented, that she is out for blood, that she has a thirst for this, and this is not coming from a sane, logical, considered perspective.
I think it's something that shines a light on the reality of a lot of legal processes like this, is that the facts are not facts. It is the truth as they are being presented from either side. And it's whether, how you buy into it as a jury, or, in this case, is the credibility of the sides telling the story. Which one do you believe more, ultimately? And that's why, she starts by, attacking his credibility. And this here is, it comes down to, okay, let's see, that this, for her, this isn't about facts. This is just about her agenda. And that's what does it.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to Picard as a character that his reaction as this goes on, he doesn't get more heightened as it goes on. He actually kind of retreats as he sees what she's doing, and he's just kind of sad that she's trying this. He's kind of like, he's demoralized that this is the tactic she's taking. And ultimately, the admiral who's there to supervise all this just gets up and walks out, and everyone in the room walks out. It's probably one of the most, and Jonathan Frakes directed this episode, so I'm going to give him some props here. I actually think this shot of everyone in the room, the hearing room, leaving until it's just her left sitting there on her own, because she realized she just showed her hand. She realized that she's just shown herself to be untrustworthy in this situation, that she can't be trusted to impartially, pursue justice and law in these contexts.
I wonder if they go back and review other things, because she mentions like the last 3 or 4 years, however long it's been since she's retired, she hasn't settled down anywhere. She's been going ship to ship, planet to planet, doing this, basically. And I wonder, obviously this time, she was wrong. Maybe sometimes she was right, but do those cases get re-reviewed now in light of this? It
calls into question, like, is she just trying to justify her own job, her own existence, even though she's not technically still working, but is she justifying her own importance by looking for people to find guilty? And it's notable that her Betazoid, I keep saying that as if she owns the Betazoid. She doesn't, obviously, but it's easy.
He works
he's the Betazoid. Yeah. He's very devout and on her side almost the whole time, but when she goes on this rant here in this towards the end, even he has this look in his face where we've just lost this. You've just taken this away. And of course, we find out afterwards that the admiral has said, "Oh, this is all over. There's no more hearings. This matter's closed. There's clearly nothing to find here. She was just looking for something." And so Picard has a couple of great speeches here. I love his time with the Borg being brought up as a sort of like an argument to say, can we trust Picard? And obviously everyone in the room, and Worf especially, gets really upset here. And it's the Romulan part specifically he gets really mad at and stands up, especially when they bring up his father and the fact that his father might have been a Romulan traitor. And we know from the episode that focused on that what the truth was there, but
he can't reveal that because that's part of the whole cover.
Yeah, which actually ties into the theme of the episode, that just because someone's hiding something does not make them guilty of what you think you're accusing them of.
Yes, it is a fact that even the Klingon at the start, he was guilty of espionage, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, but he's like, no, I didn't blow up that. That was nothing to do with me. I don't know what happened there. And they're like, well, could it have been a co-conspirator? Could someone have done it after you handed off the data? And he can't say no for sure because he doesn't know what they did with it. But just the idea of, okay, he's guilty of one thing doesn't make him guilty of the other.
Yeah, and this is the thing. Picard, when he's making his opening speech, when he was about to be questioned, he talks about how, the previous officer who's been accused of all these things, the one who's a quarter Romulan, he says that you didn't even suggest anything particularly specific. Never mind actually give any evidence or prove any of it. You just it was all based on like a hunch and based on a feeling.
Which I think leads me to I want to throw in what I think my favorite Picard moment of this whole episode is, because all of this stuff that we've talked about is great, and we haven't touched on my favorite moment. It's after the hunches have kind of come up, and he's having a private meeting with Sati, and I think it's his quarters. I'm not sure exactly. I can't remember. And he's like, John, I'm not really comfortable going down this path just based off of the hunch of your Betazoid. And she's like, well, it's not really a hunch, is it? He felt something. He definitively felt a lie. And he's like, yeah, but still. She goes, are you really telling me that if Troy, your Betazoid you trusted, came to you and said that one of your crew members was dangerous, had these thoughts, feelings, that you wouldn't, lock them up, put them under stricter supervision, whatever. And he's like, no, I probably would, and that's something I should probably fix. Like, just that awareness, all of a sudden seeing it and going, when he removed the situation and going, okay, if I just didn't trust her as much, then I wouldn't trust, these judgments as much.
It's the idea that even he has room for improvement, and that he's when he's confronted with something that maybe he has, because I don't think he's ever been anywhere nearly as guilty as what she's doing with her Betazoid in this episode. Not even close. But maybe there's a said, okay, maybe you watch the person a bit closer because there's some a reason to suspect something maybe could be an issue. But and that's the thing, when he has the scene a couple of scenes later where he sits down with this officer and just talks to him about who he is and where he came from, and sees that he's upset and he's scared. Like, he almost, just from his own experience talking to him, essentially comes to a conclusion that even if he is guilty of something, he's clearly not this monster that she is building up in her. Yeah. And that's one of the bits of camera work as well. I mentioned obviously the great moment where she's left on her own when everyone else leaves, and it's the idea that she's a relic of like a darker time. She's a relic of someone who goes out for blood, and it's something we still have in this world today. Obviously, yes, and Picard even I was thinking witch trials during the episode. Picard mentions it at the end as one of the older examples that gets brought up all the time when the subject does arise. False accusations leading to just instant punishment and death and blah blah blah. But we have there's a moment when I think it's when the Betazoid's actually yelling at him, who's really your grandfather? He wasn't Vulcan. He's right up in the camera's face, for lack of a better term. The camera's right up to him, and he's really imposing in our face, and it doesn't feel like someone looking for truth. It feels like you say, like a sort of modern style TV style of court case where the lawyer is trying to evoke a reaction to make them slip up, but it's coming from a really disingenuous place, I think. Oh,
definitely. It's why I kind of brought McCarthyism very specifically as opposed to just general witch hunt, because that was obviously a whole thing, and obviously that would have been fresher back in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And just this here, where he's just being summoned and there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, no, you show up to court and tough, you're involved in this now. If you got that was it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's calling into questions the system. It's calling into questions human attitude and the way we go looking for culprits. And one of the lines that Picard has, the thin line, or the short walk between valid suspicion and paranoia is a lot shorter than we think it is, and that's a very good idea to take on board, I think, for anyone, to be honest. But the ending of the episode where he's talking to Worf, he basically has a little speech here as he's talking to Worf about how we've done so much better. And Star Trek at its core is about envisioning a better version of the human race and where we've become, and that we have eliminated the need for money. We've eliminated a lot of the bad qualities of society, and we've gotten to a better place. And he talks about how, but every so often, without suspecting it, all of a sudden, someone almost sends us back down the path of the wrong way of thinking. And that was fascinating for me, and I loved this moment. And this is the thing that I think is almost not intentionally, but kind of abused with modern Trek shows, is that this introduced the idea that, this future with the Federation, this future with Starfleet, and this utopia.
Perfect.
Well, that's not even that it's not perfect. I mean, that's true, it's not perfect, but it's the idea that it can falter, that it could potentially one day end, that it could potentially be undone with the same mistakes, the same human mistakes that have been made for centuries and thousands of years. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying it's terrifying how very quickly, if we don't stop this, if we don't pay attention, if we don't catch it when it's happening, that enough of the people who are always going to have this bloodthirst, who are always going to look at the world in this different way, can ruin everything we have. And I think, and I stopped about it and I thought about it. It's I love the way this has been presented here, that this is valuable, that the Starfleet and the Federation could fall apart, and that danger is real, because that makes the Federation and what they are in Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation feel more important. It feels like, no, it can fall apart, and that's why they have to work to maintain it, and that's what makes it more special.
It's not just the status quo, because of course it is. It's no, it's an institution that has to be worked at to be upheld. And
yeah,
it's kind of sad how we're watching this in relatively early 2021, and it's still that maybe some people could have watched this over the last few years.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. Well, that's what I was saying. I'm compared to the new Trek shows, and Picard specifically, but Discovery counts in this as well, where we essentially have to have an excuse for an action sort of show, which is why I'm saying it's unintentionally kind of exploiting the idea that, oh yeah, this can end. I don't think they're doing it because they've looked at this episode and went, oh, we can unravel it, and it's okay to unravel it because they introduced this idea. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that unintentionally, this is kind of a seed that you can justify everything that's happened later in the timeline where they've just went in places that don't feel satisfying. This proves to me that there is a story to be told where the Federation can fall apart, and it would work, and it would be this tragedy of it falling apart in front of Picard. But Picard, like, calmly making this speech, like him sitting there being questioned and making this speech, and then having this speech with Worf at the end, just made me realize how utterly the new Picard show fails in every conceivable way. And it's heartbreaking. It's goddamn heart. They just don't get it. They don't understand why this worked.
You're making me kind of glad I never watched it, I'll be honest. Because, I mean, we were mostly on board with the first half of Discovery Season 3, which, you know, is playing in the aftermath of a fallen Federation for the most part.
Yes.
And I don't think that was a bad concept for them to play with in that show. I actually still think, even by the end of the season, it's one of the strongest elements they had. So it's like, no, even in one track, you can do it. There are ways that it can work. It's just you've got to fit the story into it still, not just
it kind of touched,
rely on it.
It got close to the ideas occasionally, but never. The writing in Discovery is just not good enough to really tackle it.
But it's so close.
But ultimately, there's a lot of things where modern Trek just has to be more of an action show. So they have to change what it is. And I'm like, there's more power in the way Picard handles situations in some of these episodes, these great episodes where he has to debate moral points, where he sticks up for his crew. Him sticking up for this officer that he's been treated like a criminal when he's not really, there's any reason to treat him like one, reminds me of him sticking up for Data when they try to take Data's kid. It's the same idea. It's him saying, no, this is unjust and I'm going to stand for my beliefs, damn it. And
and that's kind of what I'm getting at here is like, it's amazing that this isn't even the first, good lawsuit episode of Star Trek, the courtroom episode.
I was going to say, there's quite a lawsuit, but yeah, courtroom.
Yeah, I changed my mind, clearly.
This is... It's not, I wouldn't even necessarily say... Maybe it's better than Measure of a Man, I don't know, but that's the big one you compare it to, because that's the big court one, that's the Data one, right?
Right. But this is up there with it at the very least.
Yes, this was phenomenal. This was a fantastic episode. I mean, usually I start by saying, what did you think of this episode? There was no point. Because because even early in this episode, the first time he says to Satya, he's like, I don't feel if I feel comfortable going down this path with just the hunch. It's right from that line of dialogue, I'm like, there's going to be a speech later, and it's going to be great.
Yeah.
There's going to be a speech.
The first maybe 10 minutes or so of the episode, I was like, this is all right. I didn't have any strong opinion either way. It was just, okay, it's the start of a Trek episode.
Yeah.
And then it was probably around that point, 10, 15 minutes in, all right, this is going to be a good one. Right? I just kind of got that feeling. I was like, this is going there. And every 5-10 minutes as I was watching it, I found myself going, please don't fall apart at the end. Like I was like, please stick the landing, and it did.
It didn't even just stick that. It got better and better. I legitimately think it did nothing but get better in the last 10 minutes. And the ending with Worf, because to go to Worf's side of the episode, which I think plays into all this, is that it brings up Worf's father and what he was accused of, and what other Klingons, the idea that he's not even mentioned on the homeworld. Kaminar, that's the Klingon homeworld, right?
No, it's
is it? Alright, I've got it.
No, that's the Kelpian homeworld.
That's the Kelpian homeworld. You're right on. Hold on, just.
I'm like, no, that's not right. I don't know what it is, but I know it's not that.
Klingon world. Kronos! That's the one. I knew it was a K. I knew it was...
Yeah. No, I'll give you that.
I knew it was a K sound, damn it.
It's just the wrong K.
Just the wrong one. Okay, anyway, so early on, it reminds you of his father, it reminds you of, like, Worf's kind of shame and how loyal he is to Starfleet and all that because of, what the choices he's made in those situations. And then you have the subject come up where he's with the Betazoid and with Satya, and the Betazoid says, you're trying very hard to, prove you're on our side or something to that effect, but you have nothing to fear. We did question at first, given what happened with your father, the accusations that maybe you were security risk, but do not worry, you're not under suspicion because of who your father was, which is nicely thematic given what the line they're going down with, because the Romulan, all it boils down to is, You're part Romulan, therefore it's basically racism. It's just straight up racism. That's called it is.
And that's a big part of Picard's speech in the courtroom. Is how are we possibly accusing this man of anything based off the fact that he happens to have some blood generations back at this point of what happens to be one of our current enemies? And again, important to say, current enemy. I know where Trek's gone with that, but and they didn't know that at this point.
Yeah, important part of the speech though. No, it is. It's a really good part, and that makes you think of the Worf thing. And then it's almost moments later after they bring up the Picard Romulan, they had to let the traitor go because they thought they were transporting a Vulcan, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
Blah, blah.
But they didn't fight to get it back after.
But immediately, the Betazoid, who made this speech earlier on to Worf about how they trust him, about how he's a good, Starfleet security officer, he turns to Worf and says, and how could we suspect that the security didn't catch this traitor, this spy in our midst, because we have the son of a Romulan, what's the word? Conspirator, or not conspirator?
Conspirator works.
Conspirator works, but that's not the word I'm looking for. I don't know.
Sympathizer?
Not sympathizer. Maybe it's conspirator word. Maybe I've double bluffed myself into thinking the word that I've come to is not the word I was wanting. But anyway. He immediately basically says, he turns around and is racist to Worf and accuses him of not catching this because, you're also, because of your father, because of his bloodline is the word I want to use here specifically. Again, because of your bloodline, maybe we shouldn't trust you. So it just starts to seep in. This racism seeps in throughout the episode. And when it gets to the end with Worf and he's with Picard, he turns to Picard and says, I didn't see it. I believed her. I didn't, until we got to the point where she was accusing Picard of things, and it's someone that Worf trusts so much that he knew that this was false, that he knew this was not true, that he was able to snap out of it, and he obviously he didn't. But before that, he believed them. He was desperate to find whoever was behind this. He was convinced there was someone to find. I didn't see it, and Picard turns around and says, villains who twirl their mustaches are easy to spot, but the ones who disguise their stuff in good intentions and good deeds, those are a bit more tricky. And let's Worf not feel too bad about it, but it does. This calls into question the idea of someone who does gain a following, someone who does convince others. And how often do we talk about people winning elections because they use the fear of immigration, they use the fear of the other,
right? And
over and over time, recent history shows this.
Right, exactly, and that's the point here. Worf, I'm not saying he shouldn't feel bad, because he obviously needs to do some self-reflection as to why he went along with it so easily, but he's definitely not alone in history, to do that. Lots of people do, and that's why these people manage to succeed in any level.
And I think this shows the importance of having a character like Picard and having the characters around Worf who he learns from, who once he realizes that he's been tricked in some way. Because it's one thing when it's this, faceless officer that he's maybe passed in the hallway a couple of times, but he doesn't really know. But once Picard's honor's called into question, Worf is ready to go to war. He's like, how dare you? How dare you accuse my captain of this?
Exactly. And Picard's ultimate point is, if you feel that way about me, you should have felt that way about any accusation that was just as baseless. Yeah.
So Worf's learned something, and I think Picard even has a learning moment earlier on with the, maybe I should second guess how I treat people if Troy says, they're a bit suspicious. That doesn't mean to say you should ignore it, but he should maybe think about it differently.
It can't be the only thing he bases it on. It's going to be part of the overall tapestry. And I think that's why that's one of my favorite moments of the episode, is just that it is just that self-awareness and realization that even an episode where he's giving the great speeches and bringing everything back to how it should be, really, it's that moment that he still can fall prey to this as well.
I think, it's the idea that it's a potential threat for everyone, and everyone has to be vigilant with themselves as well as others when it comes to stopping this. It's not about being vigilant and catching, traitors. It's being vigilant and catching ourselves giving in to the easy fear instead of acting with compassion. And it doesn't really give us like a perfect answer, a perfect way to tackle everything here. It's more about just spotting the danger. It's about spotting the things that we have to try and do better with. And
awareness, I think, is the big message here. Is, like I say, Picard realizing that, and Worf realizing at the end again, that he needs to be more aware of this. It's a possibility. Just keeping your mind open to the fact that this can happen, which I think depressingly is all too obvious for a lot of us recently. It's been on our minds a lot over the last few years.
So no, wonderful stuff. That is the Drumhead. We'll look ahead to what's coming up next time. Episode 22 of the season is going to be called Half a Life. Oh dear. Oh dear.
Oh, we're gonna drop in quality, aren't we?
The very first. I mean, I don't know. We could be surprised, but the very first words of this description are: Counselor Troy's mother.
Oh God.
Visits the Enterprise and becomes infatuated with a man whose culture forces him into a suicidal ritual called the Resolution. I feel there's going to be room here for jokes about this man being driven to suicide because Counselor Troy's mother is after him.
I think that might happen on the next review, yes.
I'm making it now at the very least. But very good.
I mean, they can't all be this good, I suppose.
Hey, we've had a surprise with her episodes before.
Oh yeah, there was that one really fun one.
Yeah. So that is that's what's coming up next time. You can let us know what you thought of this episode in the comments. You can like and subscribe, all that stuff. Get us on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates. And of course you can support us financially over at patreon.com/mailfuzztv for as little as $1 per month and help keep all the content coming. And of course at the $5 tier you get early access to these episodes by a week. So you stay a week ahead of the public. You can feel all high and mighty and
who doesn't like feeling like that?
You can feel like you're, in the ready room, in the meeting room with the bridge crew, not just on 10 forward with all the regular people. You feel
all
like
those schlubs.
A false sense of superiority. Although, all joking aside, we love all the viewers equally. Like I say, like and subscribing, also very good ways of supporting us. But that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek, and somewhere out there, running from his own witch trial, therefore not in complete control, because people in control aren't being almost burned at the stake for being witches. Wesley Crusher is somewhere.